The most dangerous mistake a person can make is believing they already know someone's story before they have heard a single chapter of it. The morning streets of Washington, D.C. moved with their usual rhythm as a silver Rolls-Royce Phantom quietly traveled through the city. To most people, it was simply a rare luxury vehicle, a symbol of success, a machine designed with precision and elegance. But to Officer Ethan Walker, it became the first detail he noticed. Before he knew the person behind the steering wheel, before he understood the life behind the vehicle, he had already created a picture in his mind. Inside the car was Dr. Olivia Bennett, a woman whose life was built around discipline, fairness, and responsibility. She was not someone who needed a luxury vehicle to prove her worth. She did not chase attention or seek approval from strangers. For Olivia, success was never measured by what people could see from the outside. It was measured by the work she had done, the people she had helped, and the principles she carried every day. Yet the world often judged what was visible before searching for what was true. People saw the Rolls-Royce. They saw a black woman driving a vehicle many associated with wealth and status. They saw a single moment without knowing the decades of dedication behind it. Officer Ethan Walker had spent years wearing the badge of a police officer. He believed experience gave him the ability to quickly understand situations around him. He valued awareness, confidence, and the ability to make decisions when circumstances were uncertain. But sometimes confidence could become a barrier. Sometimes believing you understood everything could prevent you from discovering what was actually there. That morning, Ethan saw a vehicle before he saw a person. He saw an image before he knew the story. Olivia, however, understood something Ethan had not yet learned. A person's true value does not change depending on whether others recognize it. She had spent years building a reputation based on fairness and careful judgment. Her journey had required patience, education, and a commitment to understanding people beyond first impressions. She knew that every individual carried experiences, challenges, and achievements that were invisible from the outside. As the encounter began, Olivia remained calm and respectful. She did not try to prove her importance. She did not announce her accomplishments. She simply carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was. That quiet confidence created a contrast Ethan did not expect. He was used to seeing authority displayed through position and control. But Olivia represented a different kind of strength. A strength built through wisdom, preparation, and integrity. Neither of them knew how significant this moment would become. Ethan believed he was looking at an ordinary situation involving an expensive car. Olivia knew that appearances rarely told the complete truth. What he did not know was that the woman in front of him carried a story connected to the very foundation of justice itself. And soon, the person he thought he understood would reveal a truth that would change the way he saw authority, responsibility, and the meaning of true justice forever. The first impression had already been made, but Officer Ethan Walker did not yet realize how much he was missing. Standing near the silver Rolls-Royce Phantom, he believed he was simply observing a situation. He believed the details in front of him told the whole story. But sometimes the details people notice first are the very things that hide the truth underneath. Dr. Olivia Bennett remained calm because she had learned throughout her life that patience often revealed more than assumptions ever could. She understood that people were naturally drawn to appearances. A vehicle, a profession, a neighborhood, or even a person's appearance could create expectations before a single word was spoken. But Olivia had spent years learning that expectations were not the same as reality. Her career as a judge had been built on one important principle. Every story deserved to be heard before a conclusion was reached. She had entered courtrooms where people were reduced to one mistake, one accusation, or one moment in time. She knew how damaging it could be when someone was viewed only through a small piece of information. That understanding shaped every decision she made. It also shaped the way she handled unexpected moments outside the courtroom. Ethan, however, was still influenced by his first impression. He had spent years developing instincts as a police officer. He believed quick observation was part of his responsibility. In many situations, awareness mattered. But this encounter challenged him to consider something deeper. Observation without understanding could create an incomplete picture. Experience without humility could create blind spots. Olivia noticed the difference between someone who carried authority and someone who understood responsibility. She had met many people throughout her career who believed power came from being recognized. But she had discovered that the strongest form of authority came from character. It came from the choices people made when nobody was watching. It came from treating others with fairness even when it was easier to judge. As Ethan continued observing her, he began noticing details that did not match his original assumptions. Olivia was not trying to impress anyone. She was not demanding special treatment. She was simply a person who carried herself with confidence and respect. That quiet strength made him curious. There was something different about the way she spoke, the way she listened, and the way she remained composed. He began wondering if there was more to the situation than he first believed. Meanwhile, Olivia understood that revealing her identity would not change who she was. A title could explain her position, but it could never fully explain her character. She did not need people to know she was a judge before they treated her with dignity. Respect was not something that should arrive after discovering someone's accomplishments. It was something every person deserved from the beginning. The encounter between them continued, but something subtle had already shifted. Ethan still did not know the full story behind the woman in front of him. He did not know the years of dedication, the responsibilities she carried, or the impact of her work. He only knew that the situation was not as simple as he first believed. And soon, he would discover that the woman he thought he was evaluating was someone whose entire life was dedicated to evaluating the truth. As the encounter continued, Officer Ethan Walker still believed he was looking at a situation he could understand within a few moments. He had seen the Rolls-Royce, noticed the circumstances, and formed an opinion before knowing the person behind the wheel. But the longer he observed Dr. Olivia Bennett, the more he began to realize that the story in front of him was much deeper than the details he first noticed. Olivia had spent her entire life understanding the importance of looking beyond the surface. Her journey had taught her that every person carried experiences that were invisible to strangers. Behind every achievement was a path filled with decisions, challenges, and moments that shaped who someone became. Her position as a judge was not created by a single achievement. It was the result of years of dedication, education, and a commitment to fairness. Long before anyone knew her title, Olivia had already built the qualities that made her respected. She learned that justice was not only about applying the law. It was about understanding people, recognizing circumstances, and making decisions with wisdom and patience. Those lessons followed her everywhere, including moments outside the courtroom. Ethan did not know the years of preparation behind Olivia's calm presence. He only saw the result, not the journey. He saw the luxury vehicle, but he did not see the discipline that created the life behind it. He saw a person, but he did not yet understand the responsibility she carried. As a police officer, Ethan believed that awareness was one of the most important parts of his profession. He believed paying attention to details helped him protect others and make better decisions. But this moment was quietly teaching him another lesson. Details mattered, but context mattered too. A person could notice something correctly and still misunderstand what it meant. Olivia noticed that Ethan was beginning to think differently. She did not try to force him into admitting anything. She did not need to explain every accomplishment she had earned. She understood that genuine understanding could not be demanded. It had to come naturally when someone became willing to see beyond their first assumption. The contrast between them became clearer. Ethan represented someone who trusted what he could immediately observe. Olivia represented someone who had spent years learning that truth often required patience. She knew that people were more than their appearances, their possessions, or the assumptions others placed upon them. That belief was not just part of her career. It was part of who she was. As the conversation continued, Ethan began feeling that something about the situation did not match his original expectations. The woman in front of him did not act like someone trying to gain attention or prove status. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from experience and purpose. There was no need for dramatic words or displays of importance. Her character spoke for itself. What Ethan did not yet understand was that the person he was trying to evaluate was someone whose entire professional life was built around evaluating truth. He did not know her name held significance. He did not know her decisions had impacted many lives. He did not know that the simple encounter taking place on an ordinary street would soon become a powerful reminder that appearances can create the wrong story, and sometimes the truth is waiting just beneath the surface. The longer the encounter continued, the more Officer Ethan Walker began to sense that the situation was not what he first believed. What started as a simple observation had slowly become a moment of reflection. The silver Rolls-Royce Phantom was still the same vehicle. The street was still the same place. But the person behind the steering wheel was no longer just a stranger in his eyes. Dr. Olivia Bennett remained calm because she understood that truth did not need to compete with assumptions. She had spent years learning that patience was often the difference between a fair decision and a mistaken one. That lesson had guided her throughout her entire career. Before becoming a respected judge, Olivia was a person who had faced countless moments where others saw only a small part of her story. They saw achievements without seeing the effort behind them. They saw confidence without understanding the discipline that created it. They saw success without knowing the sacrifices that came before it. Olivia knew this because she had lived it. Her journey through education and law was not built on shortcuts. It was built on commitment, preparation, and the belief that justice required more than simply knowing the rules. It required understanding people. Ethan had spent years believing that experience gave him the ability to recognize situations quickly. He valued instincts because they helped him navigate his daily responsibilities. But this moment introduced a different kind of lesson. Sometimes instincts could identify details, but wisdom was needed to understand their meaning. The first thing someone noticed was not always the most important thing about them. Olivia's presence challenged that idea without needing to say it directly. She did not need to announce her professional position. She did not need to explain her accomplishments. She allowed her actions and her character to speak naturally. That was what made her different. She carried herself with the same respect whether people knew her title or not. Ethan began noticing that the confidence Olivia showed was not the confidence of someone trying to appear powerful. It was the confidence of someone who had already proven herself through years of work. It came from knowing her purpose and understanding her responsibilities. The difference was subtle, but it was impossible to ignore. One person believed authority came from being recognized. The other understood that true authority came from responsibility. As the moment continued, Ethan started thinking about the people he had encountered throughout his career. He wondered how often he had seen only one part of someone's story. How often had he formed opinions before knowing the full picture? The thought stayed with him because he realized this was not only about Olivia. It was about every person who had ever been misunderstood because others judged too quickly. Meanwhile, Olivia remained focused on the same principle she carried into every courtroom. Fairness begins with listening. She did not need this moment to prove she was important. She only needed the truth to exist. And the truth was that the woman Ethan believed he understood was someone far greater than he imagined. Soon, the hidden details of Olivia's identity would begin to surface, revealing why this ordinary encounter was about to become a powerful lesson about justice, humility, and the danger of judging a person before knowing their story. The moment of truth did not arrive with a dramatic announcement. It arrived quietly, through the details that had been overlooked from the beginning. Officer Ethan Walker had spent the last several minutes realizing that the woman in front of him was not someone he could understand from a quick glance. But he still did not know the full story of Dr. Olivia Bennett. He did not know the years of dedication behind her calm expression. He did not know the responsibility she carried every day. He only knew that something about this encounter felt different from anything he expected. Olivia remained composed because she understood that people often revealed themselves through the way they treated others when they believed they already understood the situation. She had witnessed this countless times throughout her career. In courtrooms, people often arrived carrying assumptions about one another. Some were judged by their past. Some were judged by their appearance. Some were judged before anyone truly listened. Olivia had always believed that justice began with a simple action: taking the time to understand. Her role as a judge was not about being above others. It was about carrying the responsibility to look deeper. That responsibility followed her outside the courtroom as well. She did not need a title displayed in front of her name to know her own value. She did not need recognition from strangers to confirm the work she had spent years building. Meanwhile, Ethan started to feel the weight of his own assumptions. The more he listened, the more he noticed that Olivia was not behaving like someone who wanted special treatment. She was not trying to use influence or status to change the situation. She was simply expecting to be treated with the same fairness she believed everyone deserved. That realization stayed with him. The woman he had first viewed through a narrow perspective was showing him a different definition of confidence. It was not loud. It was not demanding. It was quiet, steady, and built on years of purpose. As the conversation continued, small pieces of information began connecting. People nearby started recognizing details that Ethan had missed. The way Olivia carried herself. The way she spoke about responsibility. The level of understanding she showed when discussing fairness and accountability. These details pointed toward a truth that was becoming harder to ignore. She was not just someone with a luxury vehicle and a successful career. She was someone whose life was directly connected to the principles of justice. Ethan began realizing that he had focused on the wrong evidence. He had noticed what was easiest to see but ignored what was most important to understand. The car had created a story in his mind, but the person behind the car carried a story far more meaningful. Olivia watched as the realization slowly developed. She did not interrupt the process. She believed that the most important lessons were the ones people discovered themselves. The truth did not need anger to become powerful. It only needed a chance to be seen. And soon, the hidden identity of the woman standing before Ethan would become clear, revealing why this encounter was never really about a Rolls-Royce. It was about judgment, responsibility, and the difference between having authority and understanding what authority truly means. The truth about Dr. Olivia Bennett was finally beginning to come into focus, but the most important part of the moment was not the title she carried. It was the lesson hidden behind it. Officer Ethan Walker had spent years believing that experience helped him understand people quickly. He believed that noticing details and making fast decisions were important parts of his responsibility. But this encounter was showing him something different. Sometimes the details people notice first are not the details that matter most. Sometimes the biggest truths are hidden behind the things people overlook. Olivia remained calm as the situation unfolded because she had learned throughout her career that patience was one of the strongest tools a person could have. She had seen how quickly people could form opinions without knowing the full story. She had watched individuals enter courtrooms already labeled by assumptions others had created about them. That experience shaped the way she viewed every person she encountered. She believed everyone deserved to be understood before being judged. As the information about Olivia became clearer, Ethan began to realize that the woman standing before him was someone who represented the very principles he was expected to respect. She was not simply successful. She was someone who had dedicated years to studying the law, serving communities, and making decisions that required fairness and careful thought. Her position was not built on appearance. It was built on commitment. The realization affected Ethan because he understood the difference between having authority and carrying responsibility. A badge could give someone a role, but it could not automatically give them wisdom. A title could create recognition, but it could not replace character. Olivia had earned respect long before anyone knew her name. Ethan started reflecting on how quickly he had created a story about someone he had never met. He had looked at a luxury vehicle and allowed it to influence his understanding of the person inside it. He had seen one detail and believed he understood the entire picture. Now he was learning that a single detail could never represent an entire life. Olivia noticed the change in Ethan's perspective, but she did not use the moment to make him feel embarrassed. She understood that meaningful lessons were not created through humiliation. They were created through awareness. Her goal was never to prove that she had more power. Her goal was to show that fairness mattered regardless of someone's position. That was the difference between true justice and simple authority. As the encounter continued, the meaning of the moment became clearer. The Rolls-Royce that first attracted attention was never the real story. The real story was the woman behind the wheel. It was the years of effort, the choices, and the values that shaped her journey. Ethan finally began seeing what had been there from the beginning. He was not standing in front of someone who needed to prove her importance. He was standing in front of someone whose life already represented the meaning of responsibility. And soon, one important detail would completely change how he understood the encounter. The person he thought he was judging was actually someone who had spent her entire career seeking the truth. The moment Officer Ethan Walker understood who Dr. Olivia Bennett truly was, everything he thought he knew about the situation began to change. The street was still quiet, the silver Rolls-Royce was still parked nearby, and the world around them continued moving as usual. But for Ethan, the meaning of the encounter had completely shifted. He was no longer looking at a stranger connected to a luxury vehicle. He was looking at a person whose life represented the very foundation of fairness and responsibility. Olivia Bennett had never needed a title to define her. Before anyone knew she was a judge, she had already spent years proving her dedication through hard work, discipline, and service. Her position was not what created her character. Her character was what earned her position. That distinction was something Ethan was beginning to understand. Throughout his career, Ethan had been trained to notice details quickly. He had learned that awareness could be important when making decisions. But this experience showed him that awareness was only the beginning. True understanding required something more. It required patience. It required listening. It required the willingness to admit that the first explanation was not always the correct one. Olivia watched the change in Ethan's expression and recognized the moment when a person begins to question their own assumptions. She had seen that moment many times throughout her work. It was the moment when people stopped defending what they believed and started searching for what was true. That was where growth began. She did not need to remind Ethan about her accomplishments. She did not need to explain the importance of her position. The lesson was already becoming clear. A person's value should never depend on whether others recognize their achievements. Respect should come before knowledge of someone's background, career, or success. Ethan began thinking about the responsibility that came with wearing a badge. He realized that authority was not simply about having the ability to make decisions. It was about making those decisions with fairness and understanding. A badge represented public trust, and public trust required humility. The realization stayed with him because it challenged something deeper than a single interaction. It challenged the way people sometimes judge others before knowing their story. Olivia's calm response also showed Ethan another important difference. She had every reason to focus on proving him wrong, but she chose something more meaningful. She chose to let the truth speak for itself. She understood that real justice was not about making someone feel small. It was about creating a moment where people could recognize a better way forward. As the encounter reached a turning point, Ethan finally understood that the most important detail had never been the vehicle, the appearance, or the assumptions surrounding the moment. The most important detail was the person standing in front of him. The woman he believed he had already understood was someone whose entire career was built on discovering the truth hidden beneath the surface. And now, Ethan was facing the same lesson she had spent years applying in every courtroom. Before judging someone, first take the time to understand their story. For the first time since the encounter began, Officer Ethan Walker no longer saw Dr. Olivia Bennett through the limited picture created by his first impression. He was beginning to understand that every person carried a story that could not be discovered by looking at a single moment. The luxury vehicle, the appearance, and the assumptions connected to them had all created a false image in his mind. But the truth was far more meaningful. Olivia had never measured her worth by what others noticed first. She had built her life around principles that existed long before anyone knew her position. Fairness, patience, responsibility. Those values guided her not only in the courtroom but also in everyday moments like this one. She understood that power was not proven by how quickly someone could dominate a conversation. Real strength came from knowing when to listen, when to remain calm, and when to allow truth to reveal itself naturally. Ethan thought about the role he carried every day. Being a police officer meant more than wearing a uniform or carrying a badge. It meant being trusted by the public. It meant understanding that every interaction could influence how someone felt about justice and fairness. For the first time in a long while, Ethan questioned whether he had allowed a quick assumption to become louder than his responsibility. The realization was uncomfortable, but it was also important. Growth rarely began when someone felt completely comfortable. It began when someone was willing to look honestly at themselves. Olivia noticed that Ethan was reflecting, and she respected that moment. She knew that people could make mistakes, but she also believed people had the ability to learn from them. Her purpose was never to embarrass him or prove that she had greater authority. Her purpose was to remind him of something that every person deserved to remember. Dignity should never depend on someone's status. A person should not receive respect only after others discover their achievements. Respect should exist from the beginning. The difference between Olivia and many others was that she understood the responsibility that came with influence. She could have focused on the misunderstanding itself, but instead, she focused on the lesson behind it. She believed justice was not only about correcting problems after they happened. It was also about creating understanding before problems grew larger. Ethan began to recognize that the strongest people he had encountered were not always the loudest. Sometimes they were the ones who remained composed when others expected conflict. Sometimes they were the ones who chose wisdom over reaction. Olivia represented that kind of strength. Her success was not defined by a vehicle, a title, or public recognition. It was defined by the choices she made when facing moments that tested her character. As the encounter came closer to an end, Ethan understood that this was not just a meeting between a police officer and a judge. It was a lesson about humanity. He had looked at a person and believed he knew the story. Now he understood that the most important stories were often the ones people never took the time to discover. The moment would stay with him because it changed something deeper than his opinion of one person. It changed the way he looked at everyone who crossed his path afterward. Days passed after the encounter, but the lesson remained with Officer Ethan Walker long after the silver Rolls-Royce disappeared from that quiet street. What stayed in his mind was not the vehicle, the unexpected discovery, or even the fact that Dr. Olivia Bennett was a respected judge. What stayed with him was the realization that he had almost reduced an entire person to a single moment. He had looked at what was visible and believed he understood what was invisible. But the truth had reminded him that every person carried a story much larger than what others could see. For Olivia, the encounter was another reminder of something she had always believed. Justice was not only found inside a courtroom. It was found in everyday choices, in conversations, and in the way people treated one another when there was nothing to gain. Her years as a judge had taught her that fairness was not about being perfect. It was about being willing to understand, to listen, and to recognize the humanity in every person. She knew that people sometimes made assumptions because they saw only a small piece of someone's journey. But she also knew that a single moment of reflection could become the beginning of change. Ethan carried that lesson with him. The badge he wore still represented responsibility, but now he viewed that responsibility differently. He understood that authority was not measured by how quickly someone could make a judgment. It was measured by the ability to seek the truth before making a decision. The experience changed the way he approached future encounters. Instead of seeing only what appeared in front of him, he reminded himself to consider what might exist beneath the surface. He learned that a person's appearance, possessions, or circumstances could never tell the complete story. Olivia continued her work with the same quiet dedication she had always shown. She returned to the courtroom, where every day brought new situations requiring patience and wisdom. She never spoke about the encounter as a victory or a moment where she proved someone wrong. To her, the most meaningful outcome was not that someone discovered her title. It was that someone discovered a better way to see people. The lesson was never about one officer or one judge. It was about a choice every person faces. Will we judge based on what we notice first, or will we take the time to understand what we cannot immediately see? The world often moves quickly. People make decisions in seconds. They create stories about strangers without knowing the chapters that came before. But every person carries experiences, challenges, and achievements hidden beneath the surface. The greatest mistake is believing we already know the ending before hearing the beginning. Officer Ethan Walker once believed he understood the situation in front of him. But that day he learned something far more valuable. True justice does not begin with a judgment. It begins with understanding. And sometimes, the person we are quickest to overlook is the person who has the greatest lesson to teach us. He wore a badge to represent the law. She carried the truth that reminded him what justice was truly meant to be.